Hey, thank you for joining me for this live video, Breaking the Silence, Understanding Domestic Violence, and how it is so hard to recognize. Now, not a fun topic, but one that it's important. And just so you know, this live video is completely unscripted. I have my 3 points written beside me. That is it. Because I think in today's world, we're longing to see somebody who is authentic. Unscripted, that is what you're getting here. So this is not fancy. But this story begins when I was 18 years old and I was a participant on a youth exchange living with a host family. And, the first time I met my host father, I looked at his eyes and thought, his eyes, like there was just something very, very cold about them. But I was like, oh, no, 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 doesn't, whatever. And I remember one day coming home from work and my host mom, who weighed maybe 50 kilograms, she was wearing these big glasses, this little wee woman, big glasses, and there was a graze on her cheek. Now, she never, ever wore glasses at home. She wore them to drive. That was the only time I'd seen her in glasses. And there she was, glasses on, and this red mark on her cheek. Now, my immediate thought was, I wonder if he hit her. And then I thought, oh, no, right? Like that was just too horrible to contemplate. There was no way, right, that my 18-year-old brain could accept that this had happened, that a man had hit a woman. So I went, no, no, I'm borrowing trouble here. And I didn't think much of it again, right? It was just literally too horrible. This graze on her cheek and the glasses. Oh, you're just imagining things, Kim. Leave it alone. So I didn't think anything more of it. And a couple weeks later, and their house, it had an L-shaped living and dining room. And I was at the dining room table writing letters, and they were in the living room. And they were talking, and then the discussion got loud. And he was yelling at her, completely in her face, yelling at her. And she had the high pitched, the fear response. And I don't know how long that lasted. And I looked over and I saw him pick up the coffee table and throw it at her. She was pregnant at the time. And he picked up the coffee table and threw it at her. And at some point, they realized I was there and they stopped. Now, that was 40 years ago. And I remember what that coffee table looked like. Like it was just, I was in shock. I had never seen anything like that before, and I didn't know what to do. And this was the days before cell phones. And I don't remember when I contacted my group leader and I said, I can't stay here anymore. This is what happened. And he was like, well, no, 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 no. Let's have a discussion and see if we can resolve it. So my Indonesian counterpart and me and the host family and the group leaders from both countries, we sat around that dining room table and talked about it. I couldn't back down. It was just, I had lost, like, I just felt completely unsafe knowing that that was happening. And they tried to talk me out of it. And I recall her mouthing to me, please stay. If you leave, he'll beat me up even more. And still, in my 18-year-old brain, the certainty, I was traumatized. I couldn't have empathy for her. It was too hard for me. I had to get out. And so we left. And I remember writing her a letter and saying, if you ever leave, please come to me. I will help. But I couldn't give her the help she needed. I couldn't say, come, let's go to the women's center. It was all too foreign. Now, can you relate? Have you ever been in that situation where you're pretty sure there's domestic violence happening and you don't know what to do? And you don't want to get involved, but also it's just too horrific for you to even picture it. And so you walk away and you leave the woman in danger, because that's what I did 40 years ago. Am I proud of that? No. But do I recognize that's a pretty normal reaction for someone who's never been exposed to it? Yes. And I feel compassion for me. And I feel compassion for you if that is the situation you found yourself in. The reality is domestic violence is much more common than you would think. You would never have known from looking at that couple on the outside that this was happening, right? Like I couldn't picture it. And if they had even had a suspicion that that happened, my counterpart and I wouldn't have been placed with that family. It's very well hidden. And when I say it's much more common, the statistics, Canada used to have an observatory on femicide. And every 2 to 3 days, there's a woman who it has been proven she has been murdered. And 53% of those murders take place in the home, right? So the home that we think is so very, very safe isn't safe for everyone. It wasn't safe for my host mother. 53% of the murders take place in the home. And often, right, it's not a stranger. More than 50% of the time, it is a male family member. And when it turns to homicide, right? That's when it turns to homicide. So imagine how frequently it must occur when it is less than that. And I share those stats not to depress you, but to open your eyes so that you start seeing what's happening. And there's a couple ways to tell, because of course domestic violence, yes, it's that physical hitting or the throwing of coffee tables, the yelling, right? In somebody's face, I'm yelling at you, right? That's all forms of abuse. The emotional abuse, calling somebody fat or stupid or making fun of them in front of family or isolating them or giving somebody the gears because they bought the wrong kind of toilet paper. Those are all types of abuse, domestic violence. And if you witness them, right, it's a really hard place to be. So what do you do if you witness it someplace else? And I guess, and another way to tell, you look at the eyes of the people in the relationship. If her eyes or his eyes, who's ever the recipient of this, looks really, really sad or kind of haunted and they never used to, that's a sign. The other thing is if this person who you love is all of a sudden getting very withdrawn, It's another sign. If they used to be very confident and outgoing, and they seem really scattered, right? And maybe there's a diagnosis of depression and they're on medication. That doesn't mean that there's domestic violence, but it's a flag. It's something I see in my mediation practice and my coaching practice that I hear from people who have been in abusive relationships and they're subjected to emotional verbal abuse, sometimes physical, but more often emotional and verbal abuse. So you see the signs. What do you do? What you do is when the person comes forward, you say, I believe you. Come, let me help you. Come to my home. Because they're going to need encouragement. They no longer trust themselves. Or you say to them sometimes, you seem sad. And, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here. And what would I do differently than my 18-year-old self? I know what I'd do differently. And it would be so very, very hard. With the 2 law degrees, with having been a practicing lawyer for over 20 years before I retired, I would phone the police. I wouldn't phone my group leader. I would phone the police. Because in that case, I was actually an 18-year-old witness. Which would have helped her get the help she needed. I would have made Kim today, faced with that same situation. That is what I would do. Because if we don't stand up, nothing changes. And women and their children remain in danger. So this is my first YouTube Live. And I want to thank you. And let me know what you think. Domestic violence. Do you know somebody? When I describe that, can you picture someone in that situation? Be ready to help them. You love them. Be ready to help. Thank you. Bye-bye.